A very good morning to everyone. In fact, we welcome you all to the budget webinar on technology-enabled development. The first panel discussion, which will be on energizing startups and deep techs through data governance and through data and AI. We have an esteemed set of panelists in Debjani Ghosh, President of NASSCOM, Shrikant Velamakani, the founder CEO of Fractal Analytics. Then we have Professor Inder Gopal from ISC Bangalore, and he's also the CEO of Indian Exchange. And then we have Shekhar Subramaniam, who's the head of AI at Vadhwani AI. And the session will be chaired by Dr. Rajendra Kumar, Additional Secretary MeitY. So before we start the panel discussion, I will request Dr. Rajendra Kumar, Additional Secretary MeitY, to give his opening remarks to set the context.
Thank you, Abhishek, and a warm welcome and good morning to everyone. To set the context, let me share a few slides which are focused on the budget announcements that have been made with regard to the technology domain. And then we can have a very focused discussion on the startup ecosystem, especially with reference to how they can be navigated with an innovative data economy and artificial intelligence. So let me just share a few slides on this. So as I mentioned, there have been very important announcements in the budget this year with focus on the technology-enabled development. So one of the major announcements is the grant of infrastructure status to data centers and energy storage systems. This is aimed at giving a strong support and boost to the setting up of data centers in India. Then there has been an announcement on duties and concessions for electronics manufacturing. Digital banking and payment, again, the scheme is going to be continued with more support. We also have announcements for electronics manufacturing in the form of support through PLI schemes, and also enablement of sunrise sectors and deep technologies. There is also an announcement in the budget on the AVGC sector, again, a very important sector for the tech ecosystem in India, with a focus on the strong interest that we are seeing and the strong traction in the startup ecosystem in this domain. Also, startups for Drone Shakti and Drone as a Service. This is also an announcement in the budget. Also, the announcement on digital university, again, a very important announcement from the point of view enabling the various domains through infusion of technology. The national digital health ecosystem is another major area where there has been significant support from the government last couple of years. And this also finds a place in the budget. Also, the focus on national tele-mental health programs and ease of doing business is again a major area where the government has been constantly striving to really improve the overall ecosystem for doing business in India. So there are two webinars, two breakaway sessions on the budget announcements. The first one, the current session, is on startups and deep tech with focus on data and AI. And the second session that is after this will be focused on making India a global hub for data centers and cloud. So just to mention briefly the context for this panel. So as we are all aware, India is now perhaps one of the largest technology hubs in the world with more than 25,000 plus tech startups in the last 10 years. And last year alone, we have seen 14,000 new startups overall in the country emerging. And now we have more than 550 districts with at least one new startup. So that shows the penetration and the wide spread that the startup ecosystem has achieved in the country in the last few years. And also the growing interest from entrepreneurs, our young population, the students, etc., in really thinking about going for a startup or starting their own businesses, mostly focused on technology again. Mobile data usage again is rising very rapidly, and you can see here from the figures nearly 10,000 petabytes data is being used every month. We have over 83 crore internet subscribers now. We have 83 unicorns as on a date. And this year, apart from the 42 last year, this year alone, in the first 2 months, we have seen 10 new unicorns emerging. So that again shows how far our startup ecosystem has grown, and the need for supporting the growth of startups so that they can become unicorns and become competitive at the international level. We also have published a draft India data accessibility and use policy just last week, which has focused on data governance, how data can be made available to the wider ecosystem partners and the stakeholders so that we can support the emergence of an innovative data economy and focus on the startups who can use this data for not only developing advanced technology, but also deploying them in various domains. API Setu is another domain, another platform where METI has made a lot of efforts to bring together various government departments so that they can share data in a seamless fashion through an automated process rather than publishing on a platform and then making it available. So this makes the process of sharing data much more easier and much more available to all the departments. So the focus of this panel would be on the prominent initiative that METI has taken and also the wider trends in the industry that we are seeing with regard to the startups and how they can be supported to grow further. Potential for job creation is another focus of the panels that have been organized. How we can boost employability through these initiatives. Then self-reliance or Atmanirbharta that Honorable PM has been mentioning on multiple occasions. That's another goal that we have in mind. The Honorable PM in the address today morning, he mentioned about the startup ecosystem and the role that India is playing worldwide in terms of growing this sector so well in the last few years. Also, we need to realize where we would be 25 years hence in 2047. That is the Amrit Kal with India at 100 years. Then suggested course of action while reducing the compliance burden is another area of focus for this panel. So I would conclude here and I look forward to a very engaging discussion in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for setting the context rightly and in line with what Honorable Prime Minister mentioned in this morning with regard to especially relating to the subject for our panel discussion related to how data governance frameworks and setting of data standards as also data security standards can really kickstart our economy, especially with a special focus on what startups can do, especially in the field of AI. So we'll be focusing on this subject and look forward to in what ways we can develop an action plan. The intent of this webinar is primarily to involve the key stakeholders, to get insight from them, to get suggestions from them, which can help the government make a roadmap with regard to how we can go ahead in achieving the broader objectives which has been laid down by Honorable Prime Minister. So to kickstart this discussion, given that we have limited time, I would start with Debajani Ghosh, who is the president of NASSCOM and who has been at the forefront of working with the government and the industry in trying to ensure how best we can leverage our position in the world as a tech nation and as a talent nation. The NASSCOM's recent report on data and AI also mentioned how we can add more than $500 billion to the digital economy, which will be very vital for our $1 trillion digital economy. She has been working, the NASSCOM's reports on startups also shows how robust our startup ecosystem has been growing. So in that context, I would like to let us know what does she think with regard to in what ways we can leverage data and AI and to further kickstart the entire startup ecosystem and to ensure that we are able to achieve our $1 trillion digital economy goal.
Thank you for that. Now, thank you very much, Abhishek, and good morning to everyone. I think as Dr. Kumar rightly put it, if we look back at 2021, it was it was definitely a watershed year for the tech startup ecosystem, for the overall startup ecosystem, but the tech startup ecosystem had a fantastic ride in 2021 with around 26,000 tech startups set up in India. And just FYI, in less than 8 years ago, in 2014, when NASSCOM came out with the first tech startup analysis in India, we only had 3,000 startups or tech startups in the country. So that's the exponential growth that we have seen. Just a few things I want to call out with respect to the ecosystem before jumping into the data governance bit. If you look at the overall tech startup ecosystem, out of the 26,000 tech startups, around 3,000 plus startups are actually what you would call, deep tech startups. And I think that's something we have to focus on, because deep tech startups are tremendously needed in India for building the next gen solutions. And we have to ensure that this growth is accelerated even faster. And what are some of the levers that we can change to ensure that we grow, we not just increase the numbers, but we achieve sustainable, healthy growth. And this is where we have to think about talent, we have to think about patient funding, we have to think about market access for these startups, not just global market access, but we have to talk about India market access and what's needed. Then the second thing I wanted to talk about is, if you look at the maturity curve of the startup ecosystem, the tech startup ecosystem is entering into the early stages of a mature life cycle. If you look at it, if you look at just pure value creation, just in 2021, these startups have employed over 6.6 lakh people directly, and our estimate is anything between 30 to 34 lakh indirectly. That's around a 10 to 12% growth in both direct and indirect jobs year over year. And that's huge. That's huge given our the way we think about the startup ecosystem. Now, what can be done to ensure that this too becomes sustainable and continues to grow? The third point I want to throw up is the way this tech startup ecosystem is becoming more diverse. Nearly 29% of the tech startup ecosystem today is established outside the metros, what we call the NCR and Bangalore kind of hubs. They are coming out of emerging hubs. If you look at just last year, of all the startups that got created last year, nearly 40% came from these emerging hubs. And that, Abhishek, gives me tremendous hope that we are going to achieve a truly inclusive ecosystem, which is much needed in India. Because when you're coming from these emerging hubs, you're bringing a tremendous understanding of the lifestyles, the values, the cultures, the consumer behavior of these smaller cities and towns. And it is also, on that note, it was also fantastic to see that earlier, most of our funding was focused on the so-called urban startups and urban problems. But last year, we saw a significant jump in funding towards these startups that are coming out of emerging hubs and that are creating for the real India, for Bharat, as we call it, right? So I think these are some of the changes that we have seen in the ecosystem, and of course, the growth across breadth and depth in terms of sectors. While fintech, retail, edtech have always ruled as the key sectors of growth from a startup perspective, but we saw huge opportunity in the SaaS sector. The Indian product companies definitely came of age, and not just came of age, but they also made a strong statement to the world that world-class products can be created in India for the world and for India. And I think that is something we have to take notice of. It was also interesting to see how startups are innovating at micro vertical levels, where each one of these have potential to become pretty much multi-billion-dollar opportunities. So these are some of the very, very interesting trends that we found in our analysis of the startup ecosystem. And I think all of this basically can be summed up in a simple sentence, that is, the Indian tech startup ecosystem today is entering a phase where it is not only becoming mature, but it is becoming sustainable. It is here to stay. And I think what we have to now think about is how do we catalyze or accelerate its growth even further, with focus not just on global markets, but with focus on India markets. And few of the things I want to call out here that we have to look at is, first, access to talent. Are we creating talent fast enough? Are we creating policies that will enable startups retain talent? And a big ask here from the industry is, enabling the ESOP reforms of 2020 to all DPIIT registered startups. So that, and we can talk more about these later. But are we creating talent? Are we creating market? Do we have the right procurement reforms in India that makes India a viable market for our startups? Most of our startups get very frustrated trying to do business in India, and we have to change that, and we have to change that now. And are we building patient funding for deep tech startups, and also startups that want to create for India and not necessarily go outside and set up business outside? What are we doing to set up funding to ensure that we look at these needs? And I think these are some important things we have to debate and discuss. Talking about data and governance, I'll be very short here, Abhishek. But if data is the next frontier for innovation, for competition, for livelihood, for productivity, then as India, I think we are responsible for ensuring that we set up the right governance structure framework to ensure that it is not just innovation, but it is inclusive innovation. It is not just creating livelihood, but inclusive livelihood. We have to set up the structure framework to ensure that inclusion, innovation, and even security become the core design principles of the data governance framework that India has. And I think this is a huge value that we can create, not just for India, but for the world. And, this is where we have to think through the questions. Like, one of the biggest challenges that the tech startups face in India today is access to quality data. How do we ensure we enable that? And I'm hoping that Shrikant will, of course, talk about it, but this is key to solve. How do we ensure that data doesn't become the luxury of just a few large companies? How do we make the access to data truly inclusive and open to all? How do we make access to quality data truly inclusive? I just want to end by saying, Abhishek, that, we've all said that data is oil, but I love the way Crawford, who's the president of IDC, summed it. He said, data is not oil. Data is like water. It is essential for life, and it needs to be clean, it needs to be accessible, and it needs to be accessible to all. And I think that has to be the goal towards which India has to work towards and enable. Thank you.
Thank you, Debjani. Thank you. You rightly identified the key trends in our startup ecosystem, whether focus on deep tech or the employment potential or the diversity which we are seeing in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, and your key components with regard to inclusion, innovation, security, with regard to data governance, and the endeavor to ensure access to quality data. That are the key components if we have to move forward on the road to $1 trillion digital economy. And as you mentioned, we have Shrikant here, Shrikant Velmakani, who is the CEO of Fractal Analytics, and he is someone who took to AI and analytics long back, 20 years back. He founded Fractal, and since then it has been a long journey. He's one of the startup poster boys for us, Unicorn in 2022, and he has been also working on a task force with the MeitY and industry for defining the data usage policy for India, and how we can improve the open data portal of the government of India. So I would like to ask Shrikant, what do you think, like in what ways we can further accelerate this whole process of enabling access to data and to actually ensure that our startups and entrepreneurs are able to leverage the data that's available in India and build products not only for India, but for the world. Shrikant.
Thank you, Abhishek. In the last 20 years, we have seen a major intelligence explosion around the world. And we have seen a whole host of intelligent products that are coming up. And we know that this trend in AI is going to change the world. And given how important it is, as recognized by governments around the world and companies around the world, I think it's super important that we leverage this opportunity for the best for India. So I think, well, I mean, I'm going to certainly come to the data governance aspect of it. I think there are 4 response vectors I do believe that the government needs to look at. The number one is encouraging the growth of AI. Now, we've discussed a $5 trillion economy. This $5 trillion economy is going to happen only when the many more private startups come in. As Debjani just mentioned, deep tech startups in India are one of the keys to our growth. India is becoming more ambitious in terms of building products that serve the world. India is thinking bolder. Private companies are thinking much, much bolder than ever before. And this is only going to grow further. How does the government encourage these kinds of companies to become successful? One is certainly making data more accessible. India has access to tremendous amounts of data, which can fuel a lot of innovative private applications. Can we make that? Can we enable that? Secondly, can India invest in some of these startups as well? One of the ideas that I will propose is co-investing in startups, either through various kinds of funds that already exist as a co-investor in them, or directly invest in startups. But I do think there is ample opportunity to spend, let's say, $1 billion. It's a symbolic thing to say that, yes, India is behind these startups. India has taken this up very, very seriously. If you look at something like skilling, again, a super important aspect of this is creating talent, as Debjani also mentioned. NASSCOM has the Future Skills Prime, which has become a very important engine for creating that talent. This market has moved from a demand constrained market to a supply constrained market, which is really good news for us, given how many engineers that we are graduating every year. So can we skill them? So these are some of the thoughts in creating those applications. I think Debjani talked about data being the new oil or the water. But if you, let's say, take the analogy of oil, if data is the oil, what we have to really figure out is what is the car that we are building and what is the destination we are going, right? The destination is important, the car is important, the driver is important, the driver is the AI. Right? So those applications, there are some game-changing applications for our country. For example, think of TB Mukt Bharat, which is an important program for us. There are several private enterprises, including Vadhvani.ai, which are actually doing a phenomenal job in solving that problem around the world. So can we really encourage these kinds of private startups by investing, by facilitating, and overall encouraging the growth of these startups? That's the first response vector, in my opinion. The second response vector is that government is one of the largest users of data, period. It is one of the largest users of AI around the world. So what is our government doing in terms of clearly signaling that we are using AI to drive our own decisions inside the government? So one of them is agri-tech. I know agriculture is a very important part of our economy, and we want to double farmers' incomes. So how do we do that without bringing super agri-tech into it? Deep tech agri-tech companies all have AI in them, right? So there is no deep tech company in our country which is not AI driven, because AI is a general purpose technology that's underlying all deep tech companies. So in that sense, I think that agriculture is the first use case. Second is the National Health Mission that Dr. Rajendra Kumar also mentioned, where again, I think there's significant use of AI, as we've seen during the pandemic and afterwards, that AI and data is generally super important in driving the mission, the National Health Mission. So can we use there? 3 is even improving tax collections. As we have seen after demonetization, also some of the analytical and AI techniques have been instrumental in understanding what are some of the uses and abuses of the policies. So that's a third place. So there are several interesting areas where I would say that government can use AI in a more significant way. So that's my second point. And I would like to, my recommendation here is if government could co-invest, if government could create $1 billion of use cases, some 7,000, 6,000 crores of use cases, and unleash private enterprise, it will solve government problems. It will also encourage private enterprises. That's how the first and second vectors are related. The third vector, in my opinion, is preparing India for what is coming ahead of us. Dr. N. Chandrasekharan and Rupa Purushothaman wrote this book called Digital Nation, which essentially says that 91 million people are going to join India's workforce. India is a only major economy which is a net new contributor of labor and talent to the world by 2030. If that is the case, are we really preparing these people through skilling other initiatives? We know disruption is coming. We know automation is going to replace some jobs. How do you make sure that people are ready to take on all the other roles that get opened up? The future of work will not be what we have seen in the last 20 years. It's going to be different. So a lot of work will get automated, which is actually totally fine because there's a lot of other things that open up. But in general, humans will be augmented by AI. So human beings have to learn how to work with AI, and how there are many jobs that open up, which is about using AI for better purposes. So the third response vector is really how do we prepare the nation for what could be a very interesting and potentially disruptive next 20 years as far as AI is concerned. And the last one is about governance. I think opening up data sets is one aspect of it, and making sure that there is enough privacy ensured by design, that there are enough privacy preserving technologies today. So today we have, as OGD, the Open Government Data Initiative has been a very important initiative for the government, and we are taking it to the next level as we are all planning. So can we open up more data sets, but open up them in a more responsible way, in a way that privacy is automatically there by design, and we make sure that these kinds of data sets are used. We have industry in mind, use cases in mind. We work backwards from use cases. We identify those high value data sets. Now, government has access to enormous amounts of data, and that also leads to the issue that it is like boiling the ocean. So if we have end users in mind, a few end users, not many, but let's say 20 use cases in mind, and work backwards and make sure that those use cases are specifically enabled by all the data that is available by the Indian government, and enabling that to be accessed by private enterprise, I think will be a game-changing step in that direction. So these are the four key vectors. In my mind, we have the basic ingredients to be a very successful nation in the world of AI. If we can encourage research in areas like quantum computing, in make investments in startups, in create use cases for AI, and prepare the nation for what is coming up with AI governance in place, I think we have a very bright future ahead.
Thank you, Srikanth, for rightly identifying the key pillars with regard to our strategy. We'll be investing in deep tech. That's something that seems very logical and plausible. Then investing in talent, building talent for the future, for ensuring that we are able to leverage the opportunity that is arising. Then the building AI solutions for agriculture, for healthcare, for TB. So I'm sure Shekhar is here, who will be highlighting more on that. And the most important part that you referred about is that how do we open data sets, and how do we ensure that we address privacy concerns and identify the high value data sets that can be leveraged by all in an open manner for building solutions for the future. So we have Professor Inder Gopal from ISC Bangalore, who is working with Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and they have built up the IUDX, the India Urban Data Exchange, which is precisely doing the same thing. Like, how do we ensure that data from urban sector is made available for anyone and everyone for designing solutions on top of it. So I would request Professor Inder Gopal to give some insights with regard to how it was done, how did you build a data exchange platform as different from a data lakes, and what were the legal or the technical or the governance issues that you had to handle. So Professor Inder Gopal.
Yeah, thank you, Abhishek. Can you see my slides? I just wanted to, I apologize. Can you see my slides?
No,
we can only see your desktop.
Yeah.
Can you
see? Yes.
You can see it now?
Yeah.
Yes, but we are not in a screen show mode. We are in
I know. I'll do that in a second.
Not in a slideshow mode.
Yeah, so actually, what Srikanth said is a perfect prelude to what I want to say. And I think what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of the experience we've had in practice as we have actually taken data from the urban sector and tried to make it available to startups and to other companies as well to do interesting things with the startups, with interesting things with the data, right? So it's really, how do you enable data to be used effectively? And I think the most important thing is that we have seen that there are many, many factors that prevent data from being used effectively by AI applications. The private sector has been extremely effective in doing this, but public data is very different, right? So public data is very fragmented. There are data silos, different departments, incompatible formats. I think Abhishek ji talked about privacy security considerations. And then, of course, we talked a lot about governance already, lack of rules and regulations. Nobody quite understands, who has the right to share the data, what ownership rights, what dissemination rights, all those kinds of things. And then, of course, the economic underpinnings of this, right? I mean, particularly if you want private sector data to be shared and allow, it to be used by startups. Why should they do that? Why should a large company share data and potentially lose some competitive advantage, right? So these are all important questions that need to get answered. And of course, the most important thing I think that Dipanji also mentioned is poor data quality, which is kind of the overriding reason why data is not used. So you don't see that many great use cases, right? You see a lot of people saying, oh, well, data is the new oil, or data is the new water, or whatever it is. But the fact is that when you say, well, however you act, how many startups have actually formed that have created, interesting new applications and services, say citizen-centric applications and services using data, particularly using public data, you find very few and far between. So our diagnosis, right, is that one critical key piece, and this is not the only piece. I mean, I think things like, skilling and other factors also play an important role, but this is one important piece. You need infrastructure to enable data sharing, right? And that's what is becoming called a data exchange. This is becoming common parlance in the industry and in the technical fields, something called a data exchange. And it's very different than traditional enterprise solutions. If you look at a traditional enterprise and you say, well, how are they enabling data sharing within a company? They usually have something like a data warehouse, a data lake. There's some level of centralization, whether data is being aggregated, or even if it's not being aggregated, there's some control that's being aggregated, control of data that's being aggregated. In a public sector environment, you don't have that option. So you have complete decentralization and of data and of control. And what you need is mechanisms to be able to find the data. You need standardization. You need all the things that I've mentioned over here. What we have also found, as we have done this, and we've, we've focused a lot on the urban sector, but we have found that really this notion of a data exchange is something that goes across sectors. So whether you look at urban, which is what we have focused on initially for reasons that I'll just describe in a second, but also if you look at health, you look at agri, these are two important areas, I think, that Srikanth mentioned. A data exchange becomes a critical part. And you look at what people have defined as the health stack or the agri stack, there's always a layer which says, okay, there's some kind of data exchange, which basically says there's a mechanism to standardize the sharing of data, standardize the representation of data, that is something that is essential in order to really allow the creation of applications. So our experience in this has been in the urban sector, right? So smart city mission in MOA, Indian Institute of Science, we came together probably about 3 years ago. And we said, okay, we've got some interesting technical ideas. There's a very important use case, the urban sector. Let's actually try to do something real and build something that can be of value, right? And maybe be of benefit to other sectors also. So in the urban sector, if you consider, there's mostly non-personal data. There's some personal data as well. It is from sensors, devices, cameras. There's also a lot of property records, legal records, utility records, things like that, which are sitting in repositories and databases. And what you want is is to be able to create applications. These could be from startups, they could be from cities, but they're related to mobility, safety, health, things like that, which are pertinent to the urban sector. The problem, of course, is that what we have seen is what I just mentioned: data silos, incompatible formats, security considerations. So that's where this notion of a data exchange comes in. It's essentially middleware, right? It's like a cloud-based software platform that will take the data and make it available to third parties through standard APIs, through standard data models. And it'll perform three functions, at least in our interpretation. And they obviously can be others as well. But in our view, it performs three basic functions. It performs the function of a catalog service, which means it finds the data that's available. And that's usually the biggest problem. A startup is kind of trying to create something, say they're doing mobility, multimodal mobility. How do they get what data is available, right? They don't even know that, right? And of course, how do they get the data? How do they go petition, some public authority to get data, a little small startup? These are all very hard things for a startup really to do. So the first thing that we provide is a catalog service, right? That comprehensively catalogs all the data, describes it, and allows it to be, and creates metadata that kind of, has enough of a description of the data to allow essentially programmatic search of this catalog, right? So you don't necessarily need to sit there with a browser, but you can actually have a program go and search for this. Then there's something called a consent service, because we are not thinking of open data here, right? So this is not just simply putting the data out in public, right? What we're really saying is that there's lots of data. Some of it is public. Some of it is actually going to be the high value data, right? So you want the owner of the data to be compensated. This is how you incent private players to participate in the data economy. Not by just giving their data away, but by participating in some fashion and having some control of data as the data is released. So this is what we call a consent service. So it deals with security, privacy, policy, all that stuff. And then the third thing is translating the data into a common format, right? So as the data comes through, you'll find data represented, the same data represented in radically different ways, because there are no standards, right? So you're thinking about, I don't know, streetlights as a random example. You think streetlights are pretty simple, but there's lots of parameters associated with streetlights. Is it functioning? What is the luminosity? All kinds of parameters that you may tune with the streetlight. And the question is, how are these represented? What units? What does it mean? There's no standardization, right? So you may have two different brands of streetlight, and the application developer that's sitting here, a startup, has to know what exactly is the brand of streetlight, because the data is going to be completely different, whether the streetlight is coming from a Bajaj, whether the data is coming from a Bajaj streetlight or it's coming from a Philips streetlight. So resource server translates everything into a common form, right? So it doesn't store any data, but as the data moves through, on the fly, it translates the data into a common format and allows it to be accessible through a common set of APIs, common standard data models. These are all hopefully, as we go forward, internationally standardized, and then that allows you to build applications and use cases. So what we have done is we have deployed this in lots of cities. I'm not going to bore you with this. I think one important thing I want to mention here is it's open source, right? So I think it's extremely important as we start building public infrastructure that we really emphasize the importance of open source and emphasize public infrastructure. That doesn't mean there's not a role for proprietary software. Obviously there is, but when it becomes public infrastructure that is widely leveraged, it really needs to be open source, right? And so we've deployed in about 15 different cities. But I think the more interesting thing is the next slide, which I want to share with you, is we've actually done lots of different use cases, right? So the top layer, if you remember, was use cases, applications and use cases. So we have actually created a lot of different use cases, and a lot of them are from startups, right? So for example, we have bus data in Surat, right? And bus data that tells you the position of the bus. It tells you the fare collection. How many tickets are being sold on the bus. Tells you all kinds of things like that. And so Surat has used, NEC has used that to actually build a very interesting, citizen app in Surat. But also there's a small company in Bhopal that is doing similar things, right? But because, the thing is, once they build this in Bhopal, because it's common APIs, common standards, they can take it and they can offer it in Pune, or they can offer it in Varanasi or other cities, right? We've got another a small company, Satility. We've got companies like Vehant and Onyx. I don't want to go through the details here. You can just see it. But there's a lot of opportunities for startups. Once you standardize, once you make it easy for the data to be accessed, once you provide a mechanism for an economic model that allows the providers of the data to be compensated, essentially what you're doing is you're separating out the users of the data from the providers of the data. And whereas previously everything was one vertical stack, they were all tightly linked together. Now it's separated out. So a startup can come in and without having to go and create, put in, hundreds of thousands of sensors and have huge capital cost, they can take data that's already there and then create actually extremely valuable applications. So that's sort of the idea. And as I said, I don't want to go through all the details here because there's a lot of things that are interesting. But let me just give you one example here, right? I mentioned the Surat thing, and I just want to kind of, delve a little bit more into it to give you a feeling of the kinds of things you can do with the same types of data, right? So in Surat, we're collecting bus data, right? So we're collecting bus data, position data, fare collection data from all the buses that are flying around. So one thing that's been done, I don't know if you can see this, is a citizen app that shows you the time of arrival of a bus, but it also shows you occupancy, right? And it shows you a green picture here or a red picture, and a red person standing or a green person sitting. And green is good because it means that there's room on the bus for you to get on. So how did this startup company learn about whether there's occupancy on the bus or not? It learned through the fare collection, right? So every time a ticket is issued, there's this message sent, and then you can estimate. It's not an exact number because you don't know where the person is getting off, but you can estimate based upon the tickets that are being sold, the occupancy on the bus. And it turns out it's actually pretty accurate. So people are starting to rely more and more on not just knowing when is the bus coming, but also, hey, is there going to be room for it? And now we are starting to combine that with a private data source from bike rentals. So there's a bike rental company in Surat to do last mile. So now you can do entire end-to-end journey planning, right? You can kind of say, take a last mile from a private company, from a private provider, then you can take the public bus, and then get to your destination. The first mile from the first mile from a private entity, and then and perhaps the last mile as well. So that's a sort of a way of combining data in interesting ways. Just one more thing, before I end. But the same data, right? So this data has been created for tracking buses. Turns out that same data can actually be used to detect traffic hotspots, to determine where you want to send your traffic police, right? Where do you want to position your traffic police? You want to position them where there's some traffic hotspot. So how do you know where a traffic hotspot is? Where there's an unusual pattern of traffic, right? It doesn't mean that, just because it's a crowded area in, say 5 o'clock in front of a school, it's always going to be crowded. You don't want to necessarily send your traffic police there, but if you see something that's unusual, you want to send traffic police here. Now, because buses move on regular routes and they move on, with fairly frequent periodicity, they're essentially little probes. So what you can see here is the city broken up into I think these are 600-meter hexagons, right? And some of them they're color coded. Some are green, some are red, and the red areas are really unusual hotspots, right? This is not something you can get easily from Google Maps, right? Because it really takes into account, the history. It learns from prior data that it's got. So I just want to again highlight to you, hey, data, once it's there, it can be used in so many different ways. And when you get clever people to use data, if you make it available, they'll come up with really interesting, nice ideas. So with that, I'm going to, just stop here and, maybe turn it back to Abhishek ji.
Thank you, Professor Gopal, for clearly showcasing like what a data exchange platform can achieve. And once you have the data and once you enable sharing it across, then the opportunities that an entrepreneur or somebody who can make use of it are immense. And the
Yep.
same thing what has been done in urban data exchange can of course be replicated in other sectors. And we have somebody here, Shekhar, who has been Shekhar Subramaniam from Advani AI, who has been working in agriculture and health sectors, wherein they are trying to use whatever data that's available. Though we don't have a data exchange platform as has been done in urban, but still they have been like building solutions for social impact. Like AI need to be used in such a we are able to create solutions which can help society as a whole. So Advani AI has been pioneers in that, and we have none other than Shekhar Subramaniam to talk about that. What are the challenges and what ways it can be done? So I invite Shekhar to share his insights on this subject.
Dhanyavad. Thank you. I just wanted to start by saying हमारा जो institute है Advani Institute, हमारा एक ही goal है. We have only one goal. We are a different type of unicorn, and that is that we want to impact as many people in India with the focus of trying to impact folks at the underprivileged, the people who have the greatest amount of difficulty accessing technology. So our problem itself is complex, and as we have discussed, the importance because we actually operate at that level. Our solutions often involve dialogue with farmers, with ASHA workers, with individuals in our society across India who may have no access to any form of digitalization or digitization. And so that presents a very unique and interesting challenge. And at the same time, it calls
Excuse me, sorry.
to come out of the.
Sorry, my apologies. Dr. Indergopal, could you unshare you stop sharing your slides because we're.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
see
I
you
apologize. Yeah, I'll do that in just 1 second if you do.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Mr. Shekhar.
If I can find the panel, just give me 1 second. I'm sorry.
The top, the red button at the top.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, over to you, Shekhar.
Okay, so as I was saying, our work that we do across, so we work in different sectors with different people. We work with farmers, we work with ASHA workers, we work across the ecosystem. And one of the most important discoveries is the fact that we need to get out of our lab environment. We need to be there, and we need to take an integrated and complete approach to problem solving. AI problem solving often occurs in two different distinct aspects. The first is inside research, inside labs, where data is easily available and can be easily processed. The second is in high-tech companies who have the luxury of very large investment and access to large amount of data. We are neither. We are working last year in 2022, we were working about 4 or 5 projects. It's just a couple of months and the number of projects have increased to almost 15. And I expect to do at least 20 projects in AI this year. Now, how do we do it? We work in extremely close proximity with the government, first on the domain matters. If you're working in health, you have to have deep domain knowledge of health in order to uncover problems first and data next. You have to be very innovative. We cannot be in a situation where we refuse to execute, because for us, strategy is equal to execution. We have to execute. The constraints are whatever they are, the challenges are whatever they are. We have to just think through that and execute. So we work closely with the government to get access to small amounts of data. So that places a greater onus on design innovation with respect to AI as to how you solve problems with a small amount of data, which means that you try to do early deployment. Most of us in the AI space will recognize that AI only grows after its early deployment. Once you do it, because of the limited quantity of data that you may have access to, you have two choices. Either you wait for the world to give you perfect data, which is unlikely. The second, you start your journey on AI. Most tech companies, some of you may recollect about 6 to 7 years ago, even the suggestions that were being provided by some of the top tech companies, including Google, may not have been the most interesting ones. But over a period of time, they have been able to. It's taken them 4, 5, 6 years of intense research with billions and trillions of parameters now that they have access to fine tune their models. We don't have the luxury of that much compute or that much time. We really need to be innovative to try and identify the data that is available, work through early deployments, get feedback in an intelligent manner, and continue to deploy our models consistently so that we go from the tens of thousands of people who we can impact in the beginning, and then over a period of time, impact several lakhs and then crores of people. One of the characteristics of this means that you have to have extraordinary perseverance. You have to be with the problem until it is fully solved. You will get data, you will get complexities, you will get data drift, you will get time-based change, you will get location-based change, you will get incompleteness. For me, this is part of the AI problem solving. It's not outside. Because if we treat it as outside, we will not get any projects to do. Since our goal is to get most projects done with the highest amount of impact, we exclusively work on complex problems in this domain. And we've also recognized that our team really has to have 5 distinct teams. This is a very unique way of doing projects. The first is the domain team I spoke about, doctors, etymologists. The second is the AI/ML folks who actually work on the data and solve the problem. The third and a very important aspect of our work is user design research, the ability to think through problems which will actually be consumed by the last mile user who may not have internet access, who is touching a phone for the first time in their life. So you need to be able to deliver the solution to those people. So what are the design parameters that we need to employ? No internet, model running on the phone. How do we communicate with them? All these are part of the problem domain. Measurement and evaluation, the ability to actually determine in a pragmatic manner, not post-fact, but pre-fact, कि ये solution जैसे हम design कर रहे हैं, इसका critical measurements क्या होना चाहिए as it is being done. ना ही हम इतना aspirational रहना चाहिए कि total एकदम एक solution solve करें, ना ही ऐसा होना चाहिए कि एकदम छोटा मोटा measurement दे रहे हैं. AI/ML का internal measurements में हमें कोई दिलचस्पी नहीं है. Important है, necessary है, sufficient नहीं है. जब तक we solve the problem for the end user, our problem domain is not solved. So you need very astute capability in that. And finally, of course, engineering teams who have the ability to bring all of this together by housing the AI/ML model with the user design research, with the parameters defined by measurement and evaluation, so that you have constructs where mid-senior national level government officials can observe, track adoption, track all aspects of the AI/ML journey so that they can take decisions that actually are part of a decision support system that diverts countries' resources to actually solve problems that come out of the space. So this is a very, very pragmatic, very get it done. Our models typically we insist to try and get it in 60 and 90 days, not more than that. Our early deployments we are looking at very quick. When we get feedback, we'll build it out. This concept of having this complicated, integrated approach, which actually relies only on past proven experience and expertise. So we've got folks, most of us have extensive experience solving complex problems. In fact, we get attracted to the problem as long as it's very, very complex. We're totally confident that by working with the government, again, I see this, been extremely helpful. Because they know that we are here only for one reason. We are not for profit. We are here to solve problems. Please give us problems. We'll work with you and we'll solve it. We have a lot of confidence. We know how to do this. It's a difficult path. We're not cocky and confident. I tell my team every day, please drink a glass of water, put humility and empathy into it and drink it and come to work every day. Don't think you know everything, because you don't. I don't. We will find out the problems. We'll use our experience, expertise, and hopefully our education track records to actually solve these problems. We're very sure that in a partnership mode, we'll get it done. Of course, data is important, most important, but we also recognize that if we have to wait for that to be sanitized and clean, our work, the work that we are involved in, we will not be able to get it done. So it's a parallel track. We will increase the data. We will keep working on that. I completely agree with Professor Gopal about the different attributions, ontologies, the different things that he may be building, data provenance and other factors he may be building on top of his data matters. That's one aspect. We were thrilled to get those kinds of data sets, but we also have to work with reality. And we work on both spaces. That's all I have to say. Thank you again. Dhanyavad. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Shekhar, and in fact, for giving a practitioner's view with regard to how to build solutions. In a way, you have given in a nutshell the toolkit for building AI solutions and how one can go about it. I'm sure it's very relevant, especially with regard to those who are thinking of using whatever data that they have to solve any complex problems using AI. We are almost nearing to the end of the session. We have one question with regard to collecting data, whether how to get pothole data in a more reactive pothole data which can be used for building solutions from Ranjit. So I don't think we have time for many more audience questions, but what I will do is that since we have almost 3 minutes left, I will request the panelists to kind of in one line, if you would like to say what is the ask from the government and what you think we can realize the larger vision that we have, which was espoused by Honorable Prime Minister. What will that be? So Debjani, Shrikant, and Inder and Shekhar, quickly. We are really on the dot. Yeah.
I can go first. I would say 5,000 crores of investment in AI use cases, 5,000 crores of investment in AI startups, and 5 million people trained on AI. I think that would be that's my recipe for how India could leverage this opportunity.
Thank you.
And I think Shrikant has summed it up beautifully. All I will say to that is, as we get into the investments and I get into this thing, then let's make sure we come up with very strong design principles to ensure that whatever we do, it is inclusive, it is secure. I think those two have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, inclusive is the mantra. Next, we have Inder, Professor Gopal. Mute, quick. Professor Gopal, you are on mute.
Keep doing this. That's stupid. No, obviously I agree with what Dipanji and Shrikant have said. But I think from a data point of view, what I would say is that creating, and I think you're already doing some of this, creating a strong data governance framework, creating a strong data sharing culture, right? And then actually enabling. Creating some use cases, right, where there have been some success stories where data is actually being used to create value, right? Somehow sponsoring those, finding those, sponsoring those, because success breeds success, right? Right now, there is real skepticism that data kind of driven companies and data is, people say data is the new oil, but there's no real evidence of that yet. And I think creating some examples, creating some use cases that actually show that, I think will be wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Shekhar?
बहुत आभार रहेंगे आप जितने हमें प्रॉब्लम्स देंगे बस वही रिक्वेस्ट है जितने गवर्नमेंट डिपार्टमेंट से जितने भी प्रॉब्लम्स देंगे हम मौजूद होंगे.
Yeah. So thank you all panelists. We are at 12 now, and we have kind of finished the session discussion, and we have got some real actionable points as mentioned by Shrikant and Debjani and Professor Gopal and Shekhar. And what we'll do is that we'll document this with regard to the recommendations, and we'll share it quickly in the next hour or so, because in the second the presentation with regard to our discussions has to be made. So the draft will be shared on email, and if you have any suggestions to make, please do so quickly before the plenary session in the afternoon. So thank you all for joining it. The next session is about to begin. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you.
Arindra Kumar, for the next
Thank
session
you.
on data centers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we can begin the next panel on making India a global hub for data centers and cloud. So I think all the panelists are with us for the second session. So I welcome all the panelists. We have a star-studded panel. So we hope to have a very meaningful discussion on this topic. To set the context and just to initiate discussion, I would make a very short presentation. And after that, we can hear from the panelists. So let me just start sharing my screen, and we can start discussion. I hope you can see the screen. Okay, so in the context of the theme for the discussion today, let me just lay out some broad, lines of thought, and then we can have inputs from the panel. So as we all know, India is now emerging as a major hub globally for data center and also for cloud-based services. So currently we have over 75 crore internet subscribers, and we are seeing a huge growth in various domains like e-commerce, then services from the government departments, and the growth in the private IT sector. And as we also know, we have now a very fast and very evolved in the startup ecosystem. We also have the proposed laws on data protection, which would require that data be stored in Indian data centers. So all these are giving a great boost to the growth of data centers in India. And key consumers, we already know. We have the public sector, that is ministries, departments. We also have the cloud services platform, which are now growing. We have a very strong and growing emerging technology sector, which involves domains like AI, then machine learning, IoT, 5G, etc. We also have a very fast growing gaming sector, about which the Honorable PM, Prime Minister, talked about in the first session. We also have huge growth in banking, education, and growth in public platforms in various domains, which are giving rise to need for creating data center infra within the country. So if we see the current situation, currently we have just about 500 megawatt of IT load capacity in India. And we are just about equal to what Singapore has, which is a very small country, and also what we see in some countries in Europe. So there's a huge potential for the growth of this particular sector in India. And this is the right time that we thought about how we can support the growth of this sector in the coming time. So in terms of the policy that METI has proposed to bring into effect on the data cloud, I would just mention a few points to build the context for the discussion by the panel. As I mentioned, the current capacity about 500 megawatt of IT load. And if we see the organic growth trend in the last couple of years, we would reach about 1,000 megawatt. That is, we can just about double in the next 5 years. The goal of the policy that we have proposed is to bring this capacity to at least 2,500 megawatt in the next 4 to 5 years, which means that we are aiming at least 2,000 megawatt of additional incremental capacity in the next 5 years in India. So as I mentioned, the total capacity that we hope to bring incrementally is 2,000 megawatt, and total load would be about 3,200 megawatt after 5 years in terms of the incremental capacity addition in data center in India. So major challenges, I think this would be relevant for the panel to really questions on and how we can really address the issues that we currently have with regard to supporting the growth of the center. So one of the major areas where we need to address concerns is in terms of the approvals and clearances, which are time consuming, and the number of such approvals required also is quite high, especially at the state level. Then adoption, publication of standards. This is one area where we need to address the current lack of capacity and the framework. We also have issues our network connectivity, especially submarine cable capacity and availability of resilient and redundant fiber capacity in the hinterland of the country, where the states which don't have the cable landing stations, they are currently facing difficulties. Then we also have issues like high cost of power, and then dedicated building code for the data centers is also not there now, even though some efforts are now underway to address this concern. The process of clearances is also quite complex as of now. This needs to be made easier. And the domestic IT equipment that is largely not available as of now. So if we really see the vision of the policy that we have proposed, the vision, as I mentioned, is to make India a global hub for energy efficient green data centers and cloud services. And then second is to encourage the use of indigenous equipment and IT products solutions for a safe and trusted infrastructure. So these are the major, this is the vision for the proposed that brought for consultation. In terms of objectives, again, the goal is to accelerate the growth of data centers and cloud services in the country, encourage the use of Atmanirbhar objective, that is to support the usage of indigenous equipment and products. Also, promotion of R&D, innovation and capacity building is another major objective of the proposed policy. And then, of course, setting up of energy efficient, sustainable and green data centers. So this is these are the objectives of the policy that MeitY has proposed to support the growth of data centers and make India the global hub for data centers in the coming years. So when we talk about supporting the growth of data centers, the steps that we have taken and we need to take are just some of them are listed here. So as we know, the government has announced that data centers will be included in the harmonized master list of infra in terms of giving this entire sector the status of infrastructure, which will bring down the cost of the funding, etc. Also, separate category for data centers under National Building Code is going to be there. From a state government side, we need to ensure that they can rationalize the required clearances, reduce them, simplify the process, publish SLA-based list of approvals clearances so that the stakeholders are aware of the effort and time required. Enable single window clearances, again, a major goal that we have set in the proposed policy. And then promote pre-provisioned data center parks and data centers and formulate own schemes and guidelines. So when we talk about connectivity, I think the main goal is to ensure that throughout the country, we can ensure redundant and resilient fiber capacity. So for example, the National Digital Communication Policy 2018, it talks about common service ducts and utility corridors, then sharing of infrastructure for providing robust connectivity backhaul for ensuring connectivity. Then also we need to support data center sector and cloud service providers to access optical fiber for connecting their data centers. This needs to be ensured across the entire country, not only in the coastal areas. And then encourage stakeholders to follow a check before you dig principle. And of course, improve international connectivity and reduce cost of bandwidth. When we talk about supporting the usage of indigenous equipment, products, and solutions, then we need to incentivize development and usage of indigenous equipment and solutions, encourage joint ventures between the foreign investors and domestic companies, strengthen testing and certification framework for the data center ecosystem, and then publish and promote adoption of standards for data center sector. This again is an area where we currently don't have adequate standards and adequate legal framework. Then promote R&D, innovation, and capacity building. Again, a major area where the proposed policy by METI focuses on. Create an ecosystem for development of an innovative product and services for the entire ecosystem, and capacity building and human resource development through collaboration with the industry bodies and our other ecosystem partners. Then in terms of supporting the growth of energy efficient, sustainable, and green data centers. So central government already has announced the interstate transport charges waiver for 25 years for the renewable energy plant setup by June 2025. So that's a major step already taken. Open access rule to encourage use of renewable energy is to be notified. This is also at an advanced stage, and we hope it can come. And then we wish to focus on reduction of the power usage efficiency from the existing level, which is about 1.6, 1.7, some cases even 1.8 to 1. Then a state government, they need to facilitate provisioning of quality and uninterrupted power supply, encourage captive energy power plants, open access approval in a time-bound manner. As I mentioned earlier, clearances at a state level are major issues that we need to address. Then grant of deemed distribution licenses status on the data center operators. So these are the main focus areas of the policy. And if we can focus on these areas, then I'm sure that it will go a great distance in ensuring that India can become a preferred hub globally for establishing data centers and for providing cloud services.